Welcome to the Doug Stravel Show. Today we have a special guest with us, Brennan Wong. Brennan, how are you today?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
How are you holding up throughout this pandemic?
Doing pretty good. Just relaxing at home. I will hang out with some of my friends here and there, but in a safer matter. And pretty much the rest of 2020 is just mostly me relaxing at home, trying to stay safe, and hopefully this whole thing will blow over soon.
Yeah, I hope so. It's been tough for a lot of people.
Yeah, and
Family, friends, co-workers.
oh yeah, definitely. And right now, I'm still lucky that my family hasn't had COVID yet, so I'm trying to keep it that way, especially with the COVID vaccines now being officially made and like being released publicly.
Moderna and Pfizer, right?
Yeah, Moderna and Pfizer.
Yeah, it's pretty good that we're getting one. So, we're going to talk UFC, life in general. I want you. There's a lot of people that may not know the terms like middleweight. What other ones did I see? Welterweight, bantamweight. Can you give us like an explanation about those terms, those fights?
All right. So pretty much, if you watch UFC or MMA, you know that there's obviously weight classes like there is in boxing. So I'll start from the bottom, and I'll try to keep it as simple as possible.
Like, is it ranks, levels?
There are ranks in each and every weight division that the fighters compete in. So it's not like just one big ranking. There's separate rankings in each weight division. So for 125 pounds, you've got flyweight. 135 pounds, you've got bantamweight. 145 featherweight. 155 lightweight. 170 welterweight. 185 middleweight. 205 is light heavyweight, and then last but not least you got heavyweight, which is 265 or maybe 266, because they allow you to do that 1 pound allowance. But for females, you got the strawweight, which is 115, and you got women's flyweight, which is 125, like the same thing as the guys. Women's bantamweight is 135, and then last one for the women's division is 145, which is featherweight.
So it's kind of like hockey, but like the age group, like midgets, bantam. What else do we have? So instead of age group, it's based on the weight.
Yeah, it's based on the weight, and they will also sometimes be separated by height, because obviously you cannot let a very tall guy fight in a lower weight class, because there's got to be some even playing field to that, because obviously you'll fight some tall guys. It's not like you have to fight the guys who are the same height as you. You will fight guys who are maybe 1 or 2, 3, 4 inches taller than you, but it all depends on the weight class, really. That's when the height really matters, because if there is some sort of big height disadvantage in one of the weight classes, then they're not going to allow that. It's either you move up a weight class or you move down a weight class, depending on who the fighter is.
So, do you think that has an effect when it comes to people betting? Like, when you bet for UFC fights, is there a metric that people could look into?
Mostly when you're betting on UFC fights, you just have to bet on who do you want the fighter to win, which fighter do you want to win, and there will be also a method of how the fight's gonna finish, probably either by decision, submission, KO, or TKO. And if you want to go into a more detailed betting option, they will sometimes give you the options of where you think who you think this fighter will win this round or that round or the later rounds. So they'll allow you to bet in the rounds too.
Interesting. So I want to recap 2020. I know there was some drama between Colby Covington and I'm not sure the guy's name, but I saw it on television.
You mean Kamaru Usman?
Yeah, I saw that. It was pretty interesting. What a rant by Colby. What was that all about?
Colby Covington, he had the opportunity of, fighting Kamaru Usman and winning the belt against him or something like that. But in their first match, which is pretty much held on my birthday, and actually I just turned 22 not too long ago, but during that fight on my birthday, I was watching it, and so in some of the rounds, it was pretty much a close fight, but majority of people had Kamaru Usman winning 3 rounds and Colby Covington winning the second round. So in that fight, if Kamaru Usman didn't knock out Colby Covington, he would have won the fight by decision anyway, so it wouldn't make a huge difference, but Colby Covington, with him being a very vocal guy and likes to talk trash, he called out Kamaru Usman again, hoping that he will get a rematch and going for the title again. And Kamaru Usman, obviously, he's like pretty much excited to wait for that because he wants to beat him up again. But obviously, within next year, Kamaru Usman will be fighting Gilbert Burns, who is his teammate for the title. And after that, that's when the UFC president Dana White will decide who will fight for the title next and what kind of like title elimination contender fight will be held at.
You mentioned a knockout. Were there a lot of knockouts this year? Because I'm not really sure. I know we've had some competitive fights.
Yeah, there were a lot of knockouts, even like very like highlight worthy knockouts.
Logan Paul and Nate Robinson.
Oh well, Logan Paul. Well, you actually kind of mixed it up with Jake Paul. So yeah, obviously you saw.
Oh, it was Jake Paul.
Yeah, it was Jake Paul who fought Nate Robinson, and Logan Paul is going to be fighting.
Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah, Floyd Mayweather in February 2021. So obviously, in that fight, you knew that Jake Paul was going to win because not only that he's fighting a retired basketball player, but obviously with Nate Robinson, he only had 6 months to train, so it's not as enough to compare to somebody like Jake Paul who has trained for boxing in 3 years. So that experience is gonna be a huge difference. And obviously in that fight, Nate Robinson looked very, very sloppy. Like there was no technique. He kept his chin up high in the air where he's left too exposed to being countershot, and he's just charging in after him like some sort of bull. And in the second round, you already saw it. He got knocked out flat, and he lost. And we all knew that Jake Paul was going to win.
Now with the NBA, NHL, NFL, they've done a great job keeping their players, personnel safe from the pandemic. What grade would you give the UFC in handling this situation?
The UFC was the very first sports organization to have revive its just pretty much reviving sports in general during the pandemic. And since they were actually the first ones to revive the sports, I give an A plus or maybe 5 stars to the UFC, because not only that they managed to bring the sports back into live sports network or pay-per-views or streaming networks. Overall, they just did a pretty good job, and they did a pretty good job of making sure that their fighters are safe, they don't get COVID. And even though throughout this year some of the fighters had COVID, but majority of fighters throughout that year got tested negative, and they were able to keep their job, get paid, and provide for the family, and just do what they love.
Because if you think about it, there's more contact. You're not 6 feet apart. You're breathing on top of each other. So it's pretty amazing how they were able to keep all the fighters safe.
Yeah, and cause like I say, if you get tested negative, you're physically and mentally healthy enough to compete. Whether you are actually fighting with somebody in the cage and you're not doing that 6 feet social distancing rule, because it's MMA. You have to.
Yeah, you're basically breathing on each other.
Yeah, but it's not like after the fight they got COVID after, so pretty much they were able to get out of it healthy and paid at the end.
So just recently we had Anthony Pettis versus Alex Morano. We had Pannie Kianzad defeat Cesaro Eubanks, and Deron Wynn defeated Antonio Arroyo, and Talia Santos defeated Jillian Robertson, and we had Tafon Nukawiki defeat Jamie Pickett. I apologize, Tafon, if I said your name wrong, if you're watching. Jimmy Flick defeated Cody Jordan. Christos Giagos defeated Carlton Minus. Can you recap those fights for me?
Well, to be quite honest, I haven't watched those fighters, because some of those fighters I don't really know, because I was watching some of the fights with my friend Caitlin on Zoom, because we were streaming and watching the fights together through there, and we pretty much skipped some of the fighters that we don't know, and we only watched the fights to the fighters that we actually know, just like the one you mentioned with Anthony Pettis. We watched that together, and obviously Anthony Pettis got the huge decision win over Alex Morono. But that was also his last fight in the UFC, and now since he parted ways with the UFC, he is now a free agent himself.
How does that work? Free agency? Is it like a group?
Mostly fighters, whenever they go to free agency, they will just either try to find like another MMA company that they will fight for, like, the title, or get paid more, or just benefiting themselves, or they'll just pretty much work on it by themselves and their team. Because, like, free agency is not like a huge group type of thing. It's mostly fighters just doing like their own like solo work and trying to provide and benefit themselves in the future. And it mostly happens when either fighters are not getting paid enough in the UFC, or they get cut by the UFC, or they just want to move on to like a different MMA organization just to get that title from there, or provide like a whole new history or legacy for themselves.
So is it kind of like with like sponsors?
Yes, actually, there's a little bit of that gets involved with some of the fighters, because in the UFC, you only get sponsored by Reebok. But I mean, Reebok's deal with UFC is going to end next year, and then the new company Venom, which is another MMA like apparel like kind of company, they're going to be working on a deal with the UFC soon. So now, not only that Venom will be working with the UFC in the future now, in the beginning of 2021, but fighters will also get paid a lot more. They will have better apparel and gear to represent the company that they work with, and I'm excited to see that, because I also own a couple of Venom gear myself, like boxing gloves, and that's pretty much it.
Because like with NASCAR, you have like Hendrick Motorsports, you have Joe Gibbs Racing. So could it like a UFC team be like, how would I say it? Let's say you and I owned a team.
Yeah.
You could have like Conor McGregor, Jake Paul, Logan Paul. Is that how it would work, or?
No, not really, because like when you get sponsored in MMA, it's just mostly the company that like pays you to like represent like the company. So like, because back then in the UFC, you would see fighters like having like printed like brand or logos on their shorts representing the companies that they're sponsored with, including like banners. But that's when, like, more than a few years later, that's when the UFC decided to cut all of those like many sponsorships and just only get sponsored by Reebok throughout the next few years. And obviously, not a lot of people were happy about that, and some people were happy about that, because it was pretty much like um, a neutral thing with all the fans. Like I said, some fans loved it, some of them didn't, and whenever like the fighters got sponsored by Reebok, sometimes they'll get paid very well, sometimes they get a little bit underpaid, but you have to realize that not only that UFC is being sponsored by Reebok and getting some of the money from them, but the reason why that some fighters are getting underpaid, because the money also goes to the company too, like for the crew, for the people that are working there. So it's not just the fighters; it's everybody that's involved with the UFC as well. So that's why you kind of see some underpayments here and there, and that's why some fighters throughout the past few years have been complaining about them not getting paid well, and they decide to leave the UFC.
Do you feel like the UFC is trending in this country, because it seems like it's advertised more people are watching? Would you say that's the case right now, that it's on the top right now out of competitive sports?
Dana White once said that ever since he brought back the UFC during the midst of the pandemic, the whole just pretty much everything that's happened with the UFC and that company by itself, it has been skyrocketing ever since. So like sales at the UFC store, like merchandise, apparel, like accessories, anything, those sales have went up. Pay-per-view buys, streaming services, the viewership has went up as well, and pretty much the marketing itself, it just has skyrocketed everywhere. And normally not that many people have watched UFC, but it's still the most popular sport in the world. But during the pandemic, now people everywhere globally have been watching the UFC, like in China, Japan, South Korea, North Korea, Abu Dhabi, any country that you can name of, all of them have watched UFC, and now UFC has gotten a lot more popular ever since, because of the pandemic and how they were providing content for the people who are just staying at home and relaxing.
Yeah, I've noticed more people are getting into the UFC. They love watching it. They People are betting, making money. Do you think it could be because of personalities like Logan Paul, Jake Paul, Nate Robinson, all these people that we know want to get into the fights?
Well, I mean, like if you have people like Conor McGregor, Logan Paul, Jake Paul, pretty much any fighters that have the ability to influence the majority of fans and audiences to watch them fight, that would be really good for the business because not only that kind of stuff attracts fight fans, but most times you want to see the fighters like see how well they do in the ring. The other times you want to see like them getting beat up because like for example, Logan and Jake Paul, majority of people don't like Jake Paul and majority of people like Logan Paul, so it's kind of like a huge like one sided difference. But there will be some fans that will like Jake Paul and will dislike Logan Paul. But since Logan and Jake are boxers, and since they're professionally boxing at this point, you can kind of see the influence that they have had over the boxing community. Because not only that they're YouTubers and they have like high amount of following, but it has also brought more attention to boxing than ever was before because throughout the era of the UFC's like, gaining its popularity and like also just like, how Conor McGregor helped gain that popularity, boxing was nearly dead at this point, and most people didn't want to watch boxing anymore because it was so boring. The marketing sucked, and they never like had a good like way of promoting their fights because their fights would the way they promote it is just so flat out boring, and they only promote fighters who are like the main event. They don't promote the people who are fighting on the undercard. So they waste all their money and their energy on just the fighters who are fighting on the main event. And that's why you see like a lot of boxers like Floyd Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez, they get paid a lot more while other boxers they don't get paid as much, but I mean they still get paid decently well, but still it's not enough for them.
Speaking of Conor McGregor, didn't he say he was retiring?
No, he is not retiring, and obviously most people already knew that it's more like a PR stunt. But he is going to be fighting again on January, and he will be having a rematch with Dustin Poirier because during Conor McGregor's like early rise to UFC, he fought Dustin Poirier the first time, and he knocked him out in the first round, which was a very easily like lopsided win for him. So now in the rematch, who knows what's going to happen because Dustin Poirier has evolved a lot throughout these years, so the win could go either or. But if I had to choose, I am definitely going for Conor McGregor just because I still think he has enough skills and that fight IQ just to eliminate Dustin Poirier. I mean, sure, Dustin Poirier is tough. His boxing has improved. He has a really good knockout power, but like, still, I think that Conor McGregor is still smart enough to outlast him or outwork Dustin Poirier in the second fight or the rematch, pretty much.
What was your favorite fight in 2020?
My favorite fight in 2020 was Israel Adesanya against Paul Costa, and the reason why is because those two, when they fought each other, they were undefeated, and me and my friend Caitlin were watching that fight on Zoom together, so the both of us were really hyped up to see it. And as much as I wanted that fight to go like an all round, like all out war in 5 rounds, like all 5 rounds, that fight actually like ended in the second round because Israel Adesanya knocked down Paul Costa with a counter shot, and then he finished him right there and here and there. As much as I wanted that fight to go all 5 rounds, but still, I was really happy with the results, and I was still think that is a good fight for me to watch, and just because the promotion, the marketing that went into those two fighters, it was the biggest promotion that the UFC could have ever pulled in like the organization yet. But there's a lot of good fight of the year candidates for 2020, but I'll get to that in a little bit because right now I'm trying to think of like what fight like appealed to me throughout this whole year so far.
So I think the fight I was talking about with Kobe Covington was I think it was September 19th in Las Vegas against Woodley.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the fight, and then he had the interview on television
With Kamaru Usman, yes.
So I'm not trying to get into politics, But do you think people hate Covington because he's outspoken?
Well, I mean, like, if you've watched Colby Covington back then, like I have, Colby Covington back then, like from his UFC debut and then his like slow rise to like his popularity, Colby Covington was a really nice guy. He was humble. He wasn't talking trash. He respected every opponent that he's ever faced, and he never said any mean things over social media or call him out on TV like that. He never did that. But once he actually started to become a contender himself and he started getting more popular, that's when he decided to adopt this little WWE kind of personality where he's talking trash constantly, making these social media posts online, making fun of that one fighter. Pretty much everything you have known about Kobe Covington up today, about him being very mean and stuff, that's when he started becoming that person. I mean, I don't know why he adopted it to this WWE personality, but I kind of lost all respect for him because I just don't like it when people try too hard when they're like talking trash to other opponents because I'd rather just have them like just be themselves. But yeah, Colby Covington, he just puts on this ego that will get people to watch. And yes, business wise, it works because you got some people who want to watch him fight and want to watch him lose, and other times you want to. There are people who support him, like diehard fans, will want to watch him win again, like just like every single time. And obviously, since he won against Woodley, he's trying to make like this redemption of trying to get back to Kamaru Usman and try to build himself back up as his like people's champion in a way.
How do you think he would match up against McGregor?
With the fact that Kobe Covington is a natural 170 pounder, and I mean, even though Conor McGregor naturally weighs 170 pounds, but I think that the wrestling is a bit different because Conor McGregor is not that much of a wrestler. He only uses his wrestling to defend, like wrestlers and stopping it from takedowns, and that's it. But Kobe Covington, he likes to smother people to like kind of like suffocate them in a way and just like use pure dominance over them. So if I wanted Conor McGregor to win against Kobe Covington, he just needs to avoid his wrestling and just use counter shots and like make sure that he gets knocked down for sure, like Kamaru Usman did with Kobe Covington. But obviously, if Kobe Covington wants to win against McGregor, then he's just gonna have to smother him with his wrestling.
You actually make a good point. You brought up his personality. How important for like a following? How important is it for these fighters to have like a brand?
It depends on like what kind of brand you want to build yourself as, because like obviously that Conor McGregor, he has his brand of proper 12 whiskey and like all many other things, including like his own like training regimen called the Fast Program. I think that's what it's called. I don't know, but yeah, for fighters who like to build those kind of brands to themselves, it mostly depends on the popularity and how if they actually want to commit building a brand to themselves. Because there will be some fighters out there that kind of like build their own clothing brands, or they make their own company, like a small company, not like a big company that's like UFC, but a small enough company where it's like their own thing and they get to do whatever they want on the side as like a hobby, I guess. That's what I that's what I know so far.
So Mayweather is going to fight Paul, as we know, but I want to go back 3 years. What did McGregor do wrong against Mayweather?
He kind of got he got too offensive with Floyd Mayweather. I mean, sure, like Conor McGregor's plan was to overwhelm McGregor with like so many offensive like attacks and everything, but obviously with the fact that Floyd Mayweather is a very huge defensive fighter and he has a very high fight IQ in boxing, including that he has a very good stamina because boxers have longer stamina than MMA fighters. Um, what Mayweather did was that he just waited for Conor McGregor to gas himself out, and then later on in the rounds, that's when Floyd Mayweather, defeated Conor McGregor with those series of punches, and that's when the referee, just stopped it right there.
What's the difference between UFC fighting compared to boxing?
Well, obviously, it's the different skill sets because, obviously in MMA, you can punch, kick, wrestle with somebody, submit them any way you want. But in boxing, you just only punch. That's it. But the thing about actually, there's a huge difference for UFC and MMA. I mean, not MMA, boxing. So with UFC, people are less likely to die and they rather get injured in those fights. While in boxing, people actually die after the night of the fight because we've had like 3 or 4 boxers that have died of brain injury after the night of the fight, and I actually watched one of the fights that happened. So there was this boxer named Patrick Day, undefeated, like high, very high like level prospect. People were about to gain his watch him and have his popularity like rise up into the boxing community. But during one of his title fights, later in the rounds, he got knocked down so bad because if you watch the fight, he kept getting punched in the head repeatedly so hard, and no matter how much he was still standing and refusing to go down, he kept getting hit very hard against the head. And after that one like lucky punch that the opponent landed on Patrick Day just fell down on the ground and slammed his head on the canvas. And then literally after the night of the event was over, a few hours later he was transported to the hospital, and then as soon as he got to the hospital, he died on the scene.
That sucks. So we're going to take a break from professional, but I want to get into your life. You do some UFC, right?
Yes.
Not
Not
professionally.
not professionally, but yeah, I train in MMA and I do it as like a hobby because I've been following martial arts my entire life, and it's one of the things I love to like watch and actually do in my life because for how yeah I've been training MMA for 3.5 years, but obviously this year with COVID-19 I haven't been going back to the gym, so it sucks on my part.
So you mentioned that people do get hurt. Is there a technique to avoid giving someone an injury?
Not a technique, but it's more like a way of not getting hurt as much. Because obviously, like, if you're fighting in MMA or boxing, whether it be those two, if you want to avoid like long term brain injuries or potentially facing like death after the night of the fight, if you, depending on how injured you get, you just need good head movement. You just need to fight smart. You need to be more defensive, and you can't just rely on thinking that you're the more tougher guy and thinking that you will still stand no matter how many punches you take in the face. Because, like, for example, like if you watch the Rocky movies, you'll see that in Rocky 5, Rocky Balboa suffers a brain injury because of Ivan Drago repeatedly punched his head so hard in the fourth movie, and then which caused him to retire early. And later on in the Creed movies by Michael B. Jordan, that's when you see that brain injury transformed into a brain cancer.
Yeah, because and you mentioned that we've seen in hockey fights that you have these guys that think they're so tough, and then next thing you know, they get knocked out.
Yeah, well, I mean, of all the injuries, like in hockey or football or basketball or anything like that, and I'm just saying in my opinion, and I'm not like saying that this should apply to everybody else's opinion, but I think the worst injuries that you could ever face possible in any sport is football, because not only are you constantly clashing heads, like headbutting somebody, with especially when you're wearing a football helmet, regardless. Even if you're wearing a football helmet, if you're clashing somebody's head, like constantly headbutting them in that like whole entire event of football, that's a bigger brain injury than
Oh
somebody
yeah, for
punching
sure,
you in the face or punching you in the head. You know?
for sure, for sure. Right, James? Because especially in hockey, if you're gonna fight, you should know how to fight. So, how important is it to have experience when it comes to UFC fighting?
If you want to become a UFC fighter and if you want to get into the UFC, you need to build a good resume. Like you need to build like a decent record. Whether you like, because like sometimes like fighters, if they want to be in the UFC, like I said, they need to build that resume. So not only they need to have years of training MMA and get that experience of knowing how to fight, but they also need to build like the experience of fighting in the rings, like how many opponents. Because sometimes you need to have at least like maybe 3 or 4 fights to build that professional record if you want to start somewhere in any MMA organization. So, for example, if I wanted to fight in the UFC, and if the UFC were to say that like I need to have at least 4 fights if I want to sign up. So if I want to go to UFC, I need to have at least 4 fights, and majority of those 4 fights needs to have wins. Because if I lose majority of those 4 fights by losses, then I won't get signed up. But if I do win majority of those first four fights in my professional career, then I'll get signed up. So let's just say that if I win all 4 fights by KO, I'm undefeated so far in my early career, and the UFC sees that I, fulfilled that promise, then I could potentially, sign up to UFC. And it also depends on Dana White, because you mostly have to talk to Dana White if you want to sign up to UFC. But other MMA organizations still be a little bit different about how they sign you up. So everybody's different. It's not just that same guarantee factor that you'll sign up in MMA. It also depends on how the organization wants you to go, or how they want you to build up that kind of resume.
What does Dana White look for in his fighters?
He wants to see like high level potential. Like he wants to see that they can fight very well. He wants to like see that they have like these like next superstar kind of level within them, and overall they just want to see. He just wants to see the fighters that they can like entertain the crowd, fight very well, and just do whatever they can to make the UFC like more popular and gain like more recognition.
So recently we just had Jake Paul
Yes.
versus Nate Robinson.
Yes.
Can you recap that match for me?
As I said earlier to you in the beginning, first round, Nate Robinson, he kept trying to charge in Jake Paul. Obviously, that never worked, and with the fact that Nate Robinson still doesn't know how to properly box, you can see that the skill and technique level is like a huge gap between him and Jake Paul. And obviously, Jake Paul, he's obviously making sure that he doesn't get hit by Nate Robinson, despite the fact that he doesn't know how to box. He still needs to be careful, which I admire, because you need to be careful with every opponent you fight, because you don't know what kind of stuff they're going to bring. So in the first round, it was a bit slow, and they mostly did clinches because like Nate Robinson kept trying to charge Jake Paul, and Jake Paul never got to like actually show his skills that much. So, and then like later at the end of the first round, well, like 10 seconds in, Jake Paul punches Nate Robinson down, first knockdown of the fight. Nate Robinson is like pretty dizzy, and then after the 10 seconds up, they go to their corners. Second round, that's when things get interesting. So Nate Robinson, like I said, he kept doing the same thing over and over again, charging in, hoping that he would knock out Jake Paul with one punch, even though that's not going to work. And then, like, I think around a minute in or so, that's when Jake Paul knocks down Nate Robinson. Like, he knocked him out the first time. The referee gave him the usual 10 count. Once Nate Robinson got up again, Jake Paul knocked him down again with a huge haymaker, knocked him down flat on the ground, and that's it. Jake Paul won the second round via KO, and that's it. He just won like that.
So how did the Pauls get into the UFC? Because I knew of them as YouTube personalities. I knew something happened on YouTube where people hated. Something happened with one of them.
KSI called out Jake and Logan Paul to box him in the next boxing match. And then obviously that fight happened, but the thing is, KSI wanted to fight Jake Paul first and then Logan. But since Jake Paul kind of ducked him a little bit, they made a deal where, since KSI is the older brother, he would fight Logan Paul, which is he's the older brother as well, and then Jake Paul would fight KSI's little brother Deji, and then after that, then those two had their fights. So in their fights, Jake Paul won against Deji via 5th round TKO. And then in KSI's fight with Logan Paul, it went to a majority draw. And then a couple years after, that's when you know about the KSI versus Logan Paul 2 rematch. And in their rematch, obviously, we all know that KSI won because he won by split decision. And then after that, that's when Jake Paul wanted to actually fight KSI, but not just yet, because he's trying to build up like a resume into his like boxing career and stuff. But yeah, Jake Paul, after the KSI versus Logan Paul rematch, Jake Paul fought KSI's best friend, Nissan Gibb, and after that, that's when he fought Nate Robinson, which you already know. So,
where do you see the Pauls going moving forward in UFC?
Actually, they wanted to go into the UFC, but Dana White denied that offer cause Dana White thought, and I'm not sure if I remember this correctly, like word by word, but Dana White said that one, he would not allow social media influencers to fight in the UFC just because it kind of looks bad, and second of all, when Dana White recently got interviewed and he got brought up with Logan Paul fighting against Mayweather, Dana White said that, in a joking way, didn't he get beat up by this video game kid in England? So, yeah, that it comes to show that Dana White's not gonna let Jake or Logan Paul sign him to the UFC. So he'd rather have them stick to their boxing because, I guess it just suits them more better. I guess.
So you mentioned that Mayweather fight. Can you give us a preview of it? And then we'll go more into 2021.
Yeah. So Floyd Mayweather, he's gonna be fighting against Logan Paul in February 2021. We don't know the exact date yet, but the thing about this matchup is that it's not a professional fight. It's more of an exhibition. So whoever wins, whoever loses in that fight, it's not gonna matter. But most fans are still gonna consider that as like a huge thing, and it's gonna matter either way because let's just say that if Logan Paul manages to win against one of the most greatest boxers of all time, if he wins against Floyd Mayweather, then Floyd Mayweather will technically suffer his first loss.
Yeah, that's right.
Because no matter how much of his 15-0 record is still going to be intact and not have that one loss affect his record, it's still considered a loss.
Yeah.
Because whether it is an exhibition match or professional match, one of the fighters is going to win or lose either way, so it's not going to matter. And I don't know why people say that it doesn't matter, when in fact it does, because when there's an exhibition match, if you win or lose, it still matters. So, and the thing is, Logan Paul,
if you're Mayweather, I don't think you want to lose to a social media influencer.
Yeah, because if Logan Paul wins against Mayweather, then not only that, it'll be one of the biggest upset in the world that not even Conor McGregor can pull, but it'll just be one of the most hilarious yet most exciting things that people will ever witness. Because not only that, kids on the internet will make fun of Floyd Mayweather as many kids on the internet do these days, but people will nonstop talk about how Floyd Mayweather lost against a social media influencer or YouTuber.
It could be a podcast topic for me for days, weeks.
Yeah, but
because Floyd's one of the best fighters in the game.
Yeah, but we'll definitely talk about that in the next podcast or something like that in the future.
If it happens.
Yeah, if that happens.
Let's not attack Floyd just yet.
Yeah, but I'm saying that I'm just saying that we're still going to talk about that either way,
sure.
Whether he wins or loses or not. But what's surprising is that this is Floyd Mayweather's tallest opponent he's ever fought yet, because Logan Paul is 6 feet 2 inches tall. Floyd Mayweather, he's 5'8". So there's a huge height disadvantage Floyd Mayweather, because Floyd Mayweather has never fought anybody that tall in his life, and the last person who he fought that was tall was, I think, Marcos Maidana, and Marcos Maidana was 5 feet 10 inches tall. So even though that 2-inch height difference is not that much of a big deal, but it's still, that was his last tallest opponent he fought. So knowing the fact that Floyd Mayweather is coming into his fight fighting a guy who is 6 feet 2 inches tall, 6 inches taller than him, has the longer reach advantage, and also 50 pounds more heavier than him, there's a guaranteed factor that if Logan Paul lands a good punch on Floyd Mayweather, that power is not going to absorb on him very well, because Floyd Mayweather is small, and he's 43 years old, so he's not as young as fast as he used to be. So who knows how much of his chin is going to hold up, because if he gets clocked by Logan's punch that hard and he gets stunned or knocked out, it's not going to process him very well, because Floyd Mayweather rarely gets hit, and you know that he's a very defensive fighter. So, because if you see all of his 50 fights, Floyd Mayweather rarely walks out of his fights getting injured. He never gets cuts, he never gets bruised, he never gets anything. So with him possibly potentially facing that kind of outcome, who knows how he's gonna handle all of that kind of thing under one fight, because like I said before, I'm not sure if he's gonna be able to process that very well.
So you mentioned power.
Yes.
What's more? What's important? Is it the strength? Is it the weight? Is it the height?
Well, for me, like when it comes to fighting, I always say to my friends that speed and stamina is the most important thing. Because if you're faster than your opponent and if you can last longer than your opponent, then you can actually slowly break them down, or you can, actually maybe knock them out a lot more than than you can usually think. So yeah, like I said, stamina and speed is the most important thing because I find speed more important than strength because if you can hit your opponent first before they can hit you first, then that's a win-win like factor that you're gonna win this fight and like outlasting it very long because if you're a big fighter and if you have a very huge raw knockout power but at the same time your stamina sucks and your speed is extremely slow, you're not going to last very long in a fight. You're going to get exhausted, and you just might as well have to give up at this point.
So if you're Floyd Mayweather, how would you go into this fight and preparing for it?
If I was Floyd Mayweather, I would have to go into this fight by getting on the inside of Logan Paul because if he stays on the outside, Logan Paul is just going to keep on jabbing him with that long reach because Floyd Mayweather's reach is 70 inches, I believe, 70, 72. Wait, no, yes, 72 inches. While Logan Paul, he is 76 inches. So he has that 4-inch reach advantage of touching Floyd Mayweather from the distance. So if he actually really wants to win this fight against Logan Paul, he just needs to get on the inside. He needs to try to like knock him out, which I highly doubt that's possible because obviously, like I said, he's very tall and it's hard to touch somebody who is taller than you. But either try to knock him out or on the inside or just try to use his like fight IQ to like just like go in and out, like be more evasive in a way.
That's interesting because I know when you look at hockey, you look at guys that I'm not sure how to say it, but you look at guys that they think they're tough, they have the power to hit, but they can't seem to fight. So why is there issues when people think they could fight but they can't?
Cause it's that.
Do you think it's an ego problem?
Yeah, I
Or
was gonna bring that up. That it's more of an ego thing. Cause like when people think that they are tough, but when in reality they if they never fought before, if they never taken a punch before, they want to claim themselves that they're tough. Just because you've never been hit before doesn't mean that you're possibly the most toughest person in the world. And that's why when you said about hockey players not knowing how to fight, obviously they've never been in a fight. They never knew how to properly train how to fight, how to like properly throw a punch or whatever. So that's why you mostly see hockey fights whenever it breaks out to fighting like that. Most of the fights that happen in hockey, like it's just very very sloppy, really.
because even in the UFC, you have guys that do all this talking, and then next thing you know, they get knocked out.
Yes, and like I said, it's an ego thing. Like if they let their ego and their cockiness play on much of a factor to them and not focusing on the training and on what their opponent's going to do to them, then that will be their huge downfall. Just like and here's actually a good example. Colby Covington. In his first fight with Kamaru Usman, throughout the whole entire week, he's been talking trash nonstop to Kamaru Usman. While Kamaru Usman, he kind of stayed in his lane a little bit. He tried not to talk that much trash, but at the same time, just a little bit here and there. But in their fight, during the weigh-ins, leading up to the fight night, like I said, Colby Covington kept on talking trash, and then later on, when they actually fought, that's when Colby Covington had a huge downfall of getting knocked down by Kamaru Usman and losing that fight against him and not getting that title for him. So that's an example.
So if there's a dream fight that you would want to see, whether it's McGregor versus Covington, Mayweather versus Mike Tyson, Logan Paul versus Jake Paul, who would you want to see go at it the most?
Oh my God, there's a lot of good fights that are happening because like me and my friend Mark have always discussed like what is our dream fight, but at the same time we don't know whether that fight will actually come into intuition because obviously it's a dream fight. You don't know if that actually happened one day. So, um, if I had to choose, I guess I would say Conor McGregor versus Darren Till. And if you don't know about Darren Till is a very popular British fighter coming all the way from Liverpool. And this guy, he is a very good striker. He knows how to knock out people, and he is very, very tough also. And sure, even though like there might be a huge difference in like some skill or assets between Conor McGregor and Darren Till, but it's a fight that I've been wanting to see for like a very long time, that I've been wanting to dream of, because Darren Till, he used to be a welterweight fighter, so he used to weigh 170, but now since he cannot make that 170-pound limit anymore, now the fact that he's slowly getting older, as like many fighters do, since he's not as young, and since he cannot make the 170-pound limit, now he fights at middleweight. So that's a huge weight difference between Conor McGregor and Darren Till. So knowing the fact that Darren Till is now fighting at middleweight, I don't think that fight's gonna happen. But I want to believe that it will come down to that one day. But realistically speaking, I don't think it will happen.
So January 16th, 2021, we're gonna have Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar. Juliana Pena versus Sarah McMahon. Santiago
Ponzinibbio
versus
Li Jingliang.
And then January 20th, 2021, we're going to have Leon Edwards versus Khamzat Chimaev.
Mm-hmm.
And then January 23rd, we're going to have Dustin Poirier
versus Conor
McGregor. Marina Rodriguez versus Amanda Ribas. Khalil Rountree versus Marcin Prociano. And Jessica Ive versus Joanne Calderwood. Can you preview those fights for me as we start 2021?
Can you actually some of the fighters I don't know on that card, but I will go over to the ones that I do know. In case I forget one of the fighters, please look back at the list and remind me, so that I can kind of give you my insight from what I've known from my experience so far. But yeah, starting with the main event, Max Holloway and Calvin Kattar. Max Holloway, he just came off of a very, very controversial split decision loss against Alexander Volkanovski. And that was his rematch of getting his title back for the featherweight belt. And to be honest, I thought Max Holloway won the rematch. And I don't know why the judges gave that decision to Alexander Volkanovski, because Max Holloway did...
And they both have good records too, 21-6 and 22-4. So it should be a good one.
Yeah, but like I said, I thought Max Holloway won that rematch against Alexander Volkanovski back then, this year. But I don't know why that one judge gave the win to Volkanovski, which I think is a load of BS. But because the thing is, Max Holloway, when he was fighting against Alexander Volkanovski, he won 3 rounds, and Volkanovski won 2. So I don't know how they saw that as a lopsided win for Volkanovski. It makes no sense. But whatever, it is what it is. But so yeah, this fight between Holloway and Kattar, it's gonna be pretty interesting, because Max Holloway, he is as tough as they come, and Calvin Kattar, he is a very, very accurate striker. So who knows what's gonna happen? Because I want Max Holloway to win, but if Calvin Kattar wants to win, then he needs to aggressively, try to put away Max Holloway. Because if Max Holloway is not careful with Calvin Kattar's aggressive yet accurate striking, then that's just going to cost him the fight. But if I had to choose, like I said, I choose Max Holloway just because I want him to get back into the winning column, and I want him to redeem himself. Because he's lost 2 times already, and I don't want him to suffer a 3rd loss.
And then the next one we got is the Leon Edwards versus Khamzat
Chimaev.
Khamzat
Chimaev, he is a very, very intimidating guy. 6 feet 2 inches tall, a guy who is fighting out of Sweden, yet even though he's a Russian guy, I think, because he has a Russian accent and stuff. So I'm assuming that he's probably born and raised in Sweden, but his parents were Russian, I guess. I don't know, but he's undefeated, 8-0, and he has a very huge, wicked one-punch knockout power that can literally put out anybody. And he has a really good wrestling, just like Khabib, Nurmagomedov, or Colby Covington. He could literally smother anybody if he wanted to. But Leon Edwards, he's no slouch himself. And after finally getting a fight after not being active for nearly almost a couple years, he's gonna fight an undefeated prospect like Hamza Chimaev. And not only that, he's also defending his ranking spot as well. So I don't know. This is a tough fight because both Hamza and Leon are very very tough guys, and like they have the skills necessary to end it either way. So I don't know. Like this is very hard to decide. But I'm just saying realistically, if I had to choose, I'm I'm just assuming that Hamzat's gonna win this fight just because after seeing his wrestling being a lot more like powerful than Leon's wrestling or Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, I think he might get that done. And his striking, like he has a very huge one punch knockout power, and he knows how to strike as well. It's not like he doesn't know how to strike, but he knows how to. And I think for Leon, if he wants to win, he just needs to fight smart and fight carefully, like he always does in his last few fights.
Where do you see McGregor versus Poirier going?
Knowing the fact that Dustin Poirier has evolved over these years and he's a lot more tougher now than he was like back then when he first fought McGregor, I don't think that this fight is going to be like a first round knockout, of course, because they're both very very tough. So I got McGregor, and I see this fight going to a second or a third round TKO. That's it.
Not bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's McGregor's first fight in since when?
2020. No, because like he fought this year, but it was like
Yeah, but I feel like it's been a while.
he fought the beginning of 2020, and this is when pre-COVID and everybody was still able to go see the sports like live in attendance and stuff, and that's when the crowd was still there before they shut down sports and because of COVID and like not continue on and also continue on with the UFC without the crowd. So that's before when the pandemic started.
So you mentioned this in the beginning. How important is it to have the fans to watch the pre events before the main guy? Because it seems like I know from my experience, my main focus was to watch McGregor versus Mayweather. I didn't even care about the prior events. But how important is it for the UFC, Dana White, to get more people to watch the prior events before the main one?
The prelims or the undercards, it's important to Dana White because not only that he actually knows how to fill those cards with like potential fighters that have the ability to be very popular and showing very good fights from them. It's just that he knows how to market them very well. But unlike boxing, every time you see a prelim card or an undercard of boxers fighting on that same event, the promoters who or the marketing for boxers in the boxing community, it sucks. It's not that good because the way they promote those kind of fighters under those cards, like they just kind of undermine them in a way, and they only focus the promotion on the top fighters like who are fighting on the co-main event or the main event. That's it, and they get paid more. And obviously, like I said before, they get paid more. And while the fighters on the prelims or the undercard, they get they get underpaid a little bit, but I mean they still get paid decently well in a way. I don't know how much the prelim fighters on or boxers get paid on that kind of event, but that's what I know so far.
And let's do some betting. For those fights that we just mentioned, who would you choose if you had to bet?
For which fight?
The three we mentioned: Holloway versus Qatar, Edwards versus
Hamza,
and Poirier versus McGregor. Because I'm sure some of my viewers are going to bet.
Normally I don't like to bet because I'm not a huge risk taker, and I would never bet in my life. I mean, not unless if I'm really, really confident enough that I think that fighter will win, I would definitely put my money on it. But so far, I've never bet just yet. But I will think about that in the future, just because if I want to see if I actually do win something. But anyways, I'm just saying, like from my point of view, if I had to, tell somebody to who bet on who on the next upcoming UFC fights, I would bet on Holloway, Hamza, and McGregor, just because from my experience of watching those guys fight, I feel like they have the potential to actually, get the win, whether it's a win, whether it's a decision, whether it's by submission. I'm confident enough that they'll get the win, but who knows? MMA is so predictable nowadays because you can't tell like who's gonna win or not because it's not one sided anymore. Because like with so many fighters coming in with very huge skill sets and like techniques and fight IQs, anything can happen. So I mean, like I wouldn't risk betting my money on the fighters I said before, Holloway, Hamza, and McGregor. But I mean, it's your choice if you want to, and like if you have a feeling that you want to bet on the opposite, go ahead.
Interesting. This actually looks like an interesting fight. March 6, 2021. It's on ESPN pay per view. Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson.
Oh, now this is gonna be very interesting, and this is the fight that I've been always wanting to see in the women's division for a very very long time, because Amanda Nunes, two-weight division champion, first ever woman to hold two belts simultaneously, and the first woman to ever defend both belts simultaneously. Megan Anderson, like sure she's had her tough loss here and there, but she's still a very good fighter. Because not only that, she's a very tough girl, but this girl is 6 feet tall, and I've never seen a girl in MMA compete who is 6 feet tall. So not only that is Amanda Nunes like very first opponent who was like literally much taller than her, and who was at least 6 feet tall. I don't know how she's gonna handle that because normally Amanda Nunes will fight somebody who's like shorter than her or who are at least the same height as her. So this is gonna be pretty interesting. But knowing the fact that Amanda Nunes has like 20 plus more fights than Megan Anderson has, or Megan Anderson, the way that she wants to pronounce it. For Megan Anderson and Nunes, I think that Amanda Nunes will win this fight just because, like I said, she has 20 plus more fights experience in her, and she knows a lot more of a fight IQ, skill assets, whatever, than Megan Anderson. And Megan Anderson, she has like, 9 wins, 4 losses, so that huge experience gap is like very, very huge between both her and Amanda Nunes.
So, if a young kid was watching UFC fighting and decided to get into it, what advice would you give them as a MMA fighter yourself?
Well, I wouldn't say myself as an MMA fighter. I'm more just like practitioner, and I'm just a fan of it. Because if you know about me, I started watching UFC in 2009, and the reason how I got into UFC is back then I watched WWE, and when I heard that Brock Lesnar was entering MMA, I didn't know what that was at the time because I only knew boxing and WWE. But when I heard that Brock Lesnar was entering UFC, and I watched him on his UFC debut to his championship fight, that's when I fell in love with it because knowing the fact that MMA is a lot more better to watch than boxing and WWE combined, that's what made me fall in love with that sport, just because of Brock Lesnar signing up with the UFC and giving me that exposure to the UFC. Because not only that Brock Lesnar was very popular in WWE at that time, when he signed up to the UFC, a lot of the WWE fans got drawn into his debut in MMA, and that's why it got him so popular in the UFC, and also that's how it kind of skyrocketed the UFC like way back then at the time.
Now, most of these fights are pay-per-view, ESPN. With the WWE kind of on the downfall as like trending, do you see the UFC going on a national scale, like being on NBC, ABC, or do they rely more on their income for pay-per-view?
Well, Dana White likes to do both, and he actually just signed up a deal with ABC, so now you get to see UFC fights on the ABC network. And also, I forgot to mention earlier though about me giving advice to a kid who watches the fight. I was just gonna say that like if you want to become a fighter yourself, and if you want to, or if you don't want to become a fighter yourself, and you just rather train MMA as a hobby, go for it. But if you really want to become a fighter, you need to fully commit to it, and you need to know how to fight, and you need to have a good fight IQ to develop if you want to survive in that kind of career. Because in MMA, you're gonna get hurt, you're gonna get injured. And if you don't want to suffer any of those kind of consequences, you just have to be very careful and be very defensive and make sure that you walk away unscathed in a way. But yeah, so You said something about WWE and its
Yeah, like
downfall.
the ratings, the income.
Well, cause like I don't know much about WWE anymore because I stopped watching a long time ago. Because at this point, WWE is so cheesy nowadays, and like
Yeah,
it's not
it's basically more for show entertainment. It's not like
it's
an
not as
actual.
exciting as like when like the like wrestlers we watched growing up, like John Cena, Brock Lesnar, Dwayne The Rock Johnson,
Jesse
Stone Cold
Ventura.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, anybody, any of the most popular WWE wrestlers that we know of, it's not as the same as back then than it is now. Okay, the reason, in my opinion, the reason why I say that it's kind of going into a downfall is because these new wrestlers that are coming into the WWE, it's not like they're not good. It's just that we're just not used to seeing new wrestlers coming in. And I've seen some of the new wrestlers, so, enter in. Some of them are good, but it's not enough to get my attention. And some of them, they just flat out suck at, making the matches exciting because all they do is just talk and talk and talk a lot more nowadays than actually just getting into the action. And with, even though, like, the crowd is not as there as much, and and funny thing is that every time WWE has, like, their matches, they actually project people on Zoom calls into like this whole entire screen, so you can actually hear the reaction. But still, I think it's weird. And back then, before they started putting people's faces on Zoom calls and projecting into like the crowd as like a way of like attendance, when it was just like really awkward by themselves, no crowd except for the crew that's managing the event, it just looks sad. Really, it just looks very very sad and stupid. And I couldn't even watch it. I'm like, oh my god, it's so boring, really.
Where do you think the UFC goes after COVID, where we have fans back in attendance?
They're just gonna keep on doing the same thing as usual. And earlier, when you mentioned something about the UFC, what did you say something before about the UFC before I got into the WWE's downfall?
How they rely on their income.
Oh yeah, so like I said before, I'm pretty sure they're gonna do both. But at the same time, there will be some days where they will take turns on which network they will do it, either pay per view streaming services like ESPN Plus or ABC. So depending on how the event goes, they will decide whether to put on which is which, and that's mostly Dana White's job. He chooses like which network to stream it on. But I think that it's just gonna happen on both anyways, just because not only that it will give more people access and more fans and followers like to kind of like spectate and experience those fights themselves, but I think it will be a lot more good for the company than just having to rely on one network each or streaming service. But like I said, they're gonna take turns, which I already know for a fact because there will be days where they will do it, like I said, on ESPN Plus or ABC Network or pay per view.
Because when you look at leagues like the National Hockey League, they rely on having the fans in the attendance, so it's tough for them. So would you say that the UFC, even throughout this whole situation, that financially they'll be okay?
Yeah, because Dana White knows how to keep business running, and he knows how to defy the odds. Because during the beginning of the pandemic, when he pitched in the idea that he's still going to bring back the UFC, where there's no crowds and just only the fighters and the crew working there, a lot of the reporters, he was just like laughing at his face, and they said like, "Oh, it's not gonna work. Oh, you are so stupid. You were out of your mind thinking that you're gonna bring back the UFC into this and this, whatever." But a few
And
months
it worked.
few months after, Dana White worked, and it was actually one of the very first sports to come back during the middle of the pandemic. And the reason why basketball, football, hockey, or whatever, like a majority of other sports are having difficulties bringing back, into into fruition, is because not only that it kind of like they lack like confidence of like try to build themselves back up from the bottom to where they were before, but it's just that the marketing they don't do enough. They don't contribute enough to try to bring it back. At least that's why you don't see baseball as much. You don't see basketball. You don't see football. I'm not sure about football, or hockey or well, tennis and golf, it's okay at the moment, but it's not as much. But yeah, so that's why you don't see them doing as well because it's that they just lack that certain something to bring themselves back up to where they were before the pandemic had started. And not only that, the UFC was the very first sport to be brought back to the middle pandemic, but boxing was also the second sport to be brought back as well because when boxing found out that the UFC was coming back and they saw what Dana White did was very very like good for the business and how he managed to defy the odds. That's when boxing decided hey, if Dana White can do it, so can we. So now we brought ourselves back boxing into the network as well. And what's crazy is that in boxing now they actually let people attend their live audiences. So because in the last
Oh, they do.
yeah, because when I watched Canelo Alvarez versus Callum Smith, there was at least 20 to 30% of audience capacity inside of the stadium, and it's so weird hearing the crowd cheer again, and it's so weird. And at first, I thought that number one, you're crazy into thinking that you're bringing a bunch of crowds into the stadium, but at the same time, from what I've heard that they've tested the audience, and so far, majority of the audiences have been tested negative. So that's why they were there in attendance to see the fights live. So yeah, I mean they managed to make it work, and I don't. And like I said, it's so weird hearing the crowd noises and cheers and screams and whatever. It's just so weird to hear that again. It's very weird. But I'm just hoping that we'll get back to that eventually.
And it's because it seems like out of all the major sports going on, you have the National Football League, we had Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA. That UFC is number one.
Mm-hmm.
It's trending. People are watching it.
Globally.
It's advertised more.
Yes.
So, do you think most of that has to do with Dana White and the way he handles his business?
I think that without this may sound a little bit cheesy or bad in a way, but I think that without the pandemic and without Dana White's strategy of taking advantage of the marketing for the UFC and how to promote it during the middle of the pandemic, you have to give him credit for doing that because not only like I said he's made the UFC a lot more popular and has gained more sales and more money than it's ever been, but without that, the UFC would never been as popular as it is now. So you have to give him credit for that, and I'm glad that Dana White defied the odds of bringing back the UFC in the middle of the pandemic. Because I was worried that for a second while the pandemic was happening, I was worried that they were never going to bring back UFC events or fights for a whole year or not for a while, at least until 2021. But now he just did it throughout the majority of the year, and you had to. Like I said, you have to give him credit for that, and I admire it.
Could you see Dana White owning more leagues?
No, I don't think so. Because the UFC, that's his career, and he's built the UFC because of him. Because back then, Dana White, I don't know much about his history, but I do remember that I think he said that he used to do some promotions here and there for small things or whatever before he made the UFC, and he also used to work as a hotel worker too. But he quit and decided to pursue as a CEO or president of an MMA organization. But yeah, I mean, I love Dana White because without Dana White and without his tenacity or his way of how to promote the UFC, I don't think the UFC will ever be as it is today than it is now.
Interesting. I got a lot of respect for Dana White. I think he's done a phenomenal job. Because if you look at other professional sports leagues, they've struggled. They've struggled at first to get dates. The National Hockey League, it's been a while. They did a good job with the playoff, obviously, the bubble. Their season will start on January 13th, hopefully. But I think he's done a phenomenal job for sure.
Yeah, because with Dana White, like I said before, he knows how to do things, and because if you look at boxing promoters or any other MMA promoters, like in other MMA organizations, they they lack that certain something that Dana White can do that they themselves cannot do. So if you, because there will be times where other promoters would try to be like Dana White, but it never works out because, like, first of all, you're not Dana White, and second of all, the reason why Dana White is able to do these things on such a high level than you are is because not only that he knows how to be very persistent in the right way, but he knows how to be very smart about it. But unlike you, you don't rely on just one certain thing that's thinking that's going to be forever. Because like when I mentioned to you before that boxers like boxing promoters, they only promote main fighters. They don't promote the prelim fighters or the undercard fighters as much. But for Dana White, he shares that promotion.
Yeah, because I see it in the commercial. You'll have McGregor versus Mayweather, and then you'll have the undercards right underneath it. And I think that does a great job for their ratings for sure.
I mean, like for Mayweather and McGregor, I mean, even though that was mostly the boxing promoter's job that they did the promotion, because obviously this is boxing community and McGregor's coming into boxing. But from what I've heard, I heard that Dana White had a little bit of part of it in it too, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. But if he did, that's good for him as well.
Anything else you'd like to bring up?
I don't know, because I mean, like, I'm just saying that I hope that by the time 2021 comes in, we will get things done with the pandemic. People will get vaccinated. The UFC will have its like live attendances again, with hearing the crowd cheer or whatnot, and yeah, I mean like this is, I mean I'm looking forward for next year with 2021, especially with all these upcoming fights that are really exciting to watch for next year. But like I said, I'm just hoping that by the time like of early next year, I hope that people will get at least vaccinated, and I hope that the COVID cases will go down, so that way at least some attendances of the crowds can be there. But I highly doubt it though, because from what I've heard, they're still not going to do crowds just to be safe. So I mean that's Dana White's choice, because I think he said that he wanted to keep the crowds a little less still, and not as much as like when I mentioned about boxing having their live attendances. So if that is Dana White's choice of not having crowds or just keeping the crowds just by a little bit, then I mean I respect that, because I mean like whatever he does is always right.
And the fact that it'll be 2021, we don't have to hear Andrew talk about how he's going to be 21 the last 7 months.
Oh yeah, that is true, and also that'll also be the beginning of where Joe Biden will also get inaugurated as the next president. Which I'm not going to get into politics, but I'm just pointing at that out there. That's pretty much it. And yeah, another thing I'm excited about the next year is that because like this past month, you and I, we have unfriended a certain somebody. We have unfriended a certain somebody.
Well, he unfriended us.
Yeah, but
we were blocked.
Yeah, but even though he unblocked us and he unfriended us first, even though I'm not gonna say his name, Madison Valdez. Madison, if you're watching this, suck it up. But I highly doubt that you're gonna watch this, because you blocked Doug on social media anyway, so it's not like you're gonna see this. Yeah, but anyways, so
that could be a conversation for something else.
We'll save that conversation for another time.
We could maybe have Andrew come on and we could discuss it, but
we'll see what happens from there. But so
what a month.
Yeah, like I said, we're no longer part of Madison's little bubble or whatever, so we don't have to deal with his BS for a while. But so that's pretty much it, and I don't want to get it too off topic, but that's it, and we'll just save the other topics for next time.
Yeah, maybe we can have Andrew on.
We'll see what happens.
Then we gotta have commercials. We gotta do breaks.
Like I said, we'll see what happens, and it also depends on our schedules too, because not everybody can be free at the same time, So we'll see what happens from there.
Well, let's just give a congratulations to James, great producer for the Doug Straw Show. That you did a great job with the setup. Thank you, James.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a little bit of a low clap, but whatever.
So we had Brendan Wong on today. It's been a great show. I bet the ratings are going to look good. Thanks, Brendan.
Anytime, and hopefully the ratings do go up as well. But I don't know. We'll see once you upload this.
We will.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.